Hello and welcome back to The Stories That Brought You Here. It's the podcast dedicated to the stories of the people from Pender Island, British Columbia. Once again, I am your host, Chris Wakaluk, and I will be sitting down in one-on-one, hour-long conversations with current Pender Island residents to hear the stories that brought them to this smiley little island we live on, and to also hear the stories that brought them to the point that they're at in their lives right now. Today, I will be speaking with Sam Boyte. Now, if you know Sam, like I know Sam, then you're going to know him as that guy who's got his name on real estate signs all over the island. Well, we're going to get to hear Sam talk about that along with many other things. We'll get to hear him pay homage to his great-grandfather, Bugg. We'll get to hear Sam talk about what it was like growing up on Pender Island. He'll also talk about his time at boarding school. And Sam will discuss his intimate connection with Hope Bay. I absolutely loved doing this interview with Sam. It was so great. And this is going to be the last episode of the year. And so at the end of this, in my little wrap up, I'm going to tell you guys what you can expect for 2019 for season 2 coming up here. So stay tuned for that. And as well, too, get ready for some new transitional music that was performed by Ben McConkey. And I want to give a huge thanks to Ben for doing that because it sounds so much better than the music that I did before, and huge thanks to Ben for doing that. I've listened to it over and over again. I really like the way it sounds, and I hope you do too. So that's about it for that. We'll see you on the other side. And without further ado, here is my interview with Sam Boyte. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
I'm so happy you're here. We're recording this really late in the day.
It's late. I'm going to try and, gut check time here. I'll try and stay awake long enough to get through this. I'm getting pretty tired.
Okay, hang in there for sure. It's almost 10 at night right now, but we're doing it on a stormy Monday night. Well, to get into the first question that we always touch on this podcast, and that is, of course, what brought you to Pender Island?
Well, I was lucky enough that my parents had a vision back when I was a wee chap. I think I was about 6 or 7. And I think it was 1978 that my great-grandfather moved to Pender. And my dad followed him out to help him build a little house over here. And then I think my dad fell in love as soon as he got here. Just loved the island. We were living up in Parksville. I was just a wee chap. I had a younger brother. And my folks just decided they were going to take a chance and try something different. I think I remember coming in 1981 in a moving truck with my dad and my great-grandfather, who was the kind of pioneer for our family getting here. I remember listening to some stories in the moving truck coming down, and I was always a quiet kid, but I listened very intently. And apparently, I'm also told that I was I wasn't the best kid. Let's put it that way. I was a little bit of a wild one. My parents thought I was an angel, but I think I was also a little bit mischievous. I don't remember the story, but my great-grandfather, Bob Bugg, told me the story that the next day, apparently I got up bright and early. We had just moved, arriving on Pender, visiting my grandfather, and I'm in the kitchen, and I stand up on a little chair, and I look at him and I said, "Jesus, Grandpa, it's a pretty goddamn nice day out here." And I think I was 7. And obviously my grandpa looked at me and my mom looked at me, and that was the last time I was allowed to ride in the moving truck with my dad and my grandpa at the same time, because apparently the language was a little bit more than a 7-year-old should hear, let's put it that way. So that was kind of a cool time. But I do remember riding in the front seat of the moving truck, when I was about 7. And that was our first kind of trip over to Pender. And then my brother has a phenomenal memory. My memory is a little more vague, but I do think that we really just got into Pender. It was a very different island back then in 1981. Not in terms of the people, but it was half the population. I think we had about maybe 1,200 people in total on Pender. Yeah, so the island was our oyster. There wasn't a lot of traffic, wasn't a lot of tourists or cyclists. So we had the whole island to ourselves, it felt like, when I was growing up. It was pretty special.
Okay. I don't think I've interviewed anybody yet who's grown up from that age on Pender Island. What was that like as being a 7-year-old and going to Pender Island Elementary and having that experience for you?
It was amazing. My folks, obviously pretty nurturing and wanted us to be growing up in an environment that was safe and, secure so that we could play outside and not have to think about anything really, just be kids. And so, I started in grade 3 at the Pender Island Elementary School. My brother was in grade 1. And I mean, my picture is still on the wall in the school there, which is kind of cool because I can go back now and show my kids who are now 6 and 9, and we have a laugh at their dad with hair. Because as you know, the follically challenged gene is in my family. It's really neat to be a part of something where you grew up in an area that was really special to you. I went away, obviously, after I finished elementary school, I went away to high school off island and university, but I always knew that if the timing was right, I would come back to Pender and start a family here because I really valued my upbringing. It was really special.
Awesome. Well, what were some of the things that you can highlight that really made it special for you in those early days?
I can remember learning how to golf with my great-grandfather. And again, he was a pretty big influence in my life because my parents were working full-time from the time they got here, just making a living. And my mom did many different things. But I remember when I was 8 or 9, learning how to golf with my grandfather. So he would take me out on the weekends, and the little Pender Island golf course was still here. It was much different, but I think it was only a 9-hole course then and much smaller. They've changed it a little bit. So Sundays were spent him teaching me how to golf and me learning sort of the hard knocks because he was a pretty tough guy. He grew up in the early 30s. So he didn't have a lot of patience. So I had to learn to respect his rules and respect other people around us. And there was no tolerance for bad behavior around Pappy, which was nice. It was, I didn't think about it at the time. I thought that he was really tough and sometimes really grumpy, but I think about it now that he taught me a little bit about being respectful to older people and just being considerate of the people that are around you,
Nice. I know that you wanted to share some stories in an email you sent me because I asked people to send me some things that they might want to talk about during the podcast. You had a lengthy section that you wrote about your great-grandfather, Bob Bugg, but any particular stories that you want to tell right now about him?
Well, some of them are a little bit R-rated, but I think if there's probably vegetarians that are listening to your podcast, they might not like the story about him shooting a deer on his property. But I think the main thing that just made me smile was that he always had a sparkle for life. He was very adventurous. He was a hunter-gatherer though, and that's the way he grew up. So when you survive the early 30s and you are struggling to just live and feed your family, he definitely took advantage of everything. So he grew his own food, baked his own bread. During the wintertime, he stored his food and made preserves and always lived off the land. And that was pretty interesting to watch growing up. But yeah, the one story that is a little bit shocking was that one day when he was probably in his late 70s, my father got a call on a Sunday morning. And all the call said was, "Charlie, get over to my house and bring your Sawzall." And he hung up. And my dad didn't know what to think about that. So of course he zips over to my grandfather's house, and my grandfather had indeed shot a nice young buck that was eating his rose bushes in his garden on his front porch. And I guess my grandfather shot it with a .22. Apparently it didn't die. So my grandfather jumped on its back with a hunting knife, and it did drag him around the yard a little bit before he managed to put it out of its misery. So my dad got there. My grandpa was in his house coat and covered in deer blood. And of course, it turned out that this deer had been a deer that the neighbors had been feeding apples for the last couple of years. So he wasn't a popular guy on his street for that year, probably the next year after that. But that was the way he was. He did kill one deer every year. He ate every part of it. He dressed it, hung it in his garage. And just one of those things I think we take for granted our food sources now. And he never did, which was a really good lesson, I think, growing up.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you got to share in the eating of that meat as well, too.
For sure. I didn't really like venison, but when Pappy served a meal, we ate it, and it's one of those things when you learn about how things are, where the food comes from and how it's stored and how it's kept and how it's prepared, it makes you appreciate it a little bit more. And he used to take us fishing every Friday as well. And we'd go out in a rowboat and row out to Fane Island, which is just off Houston Road there. the end, and we'd row out in a little boat. We'd catch a few rock cod and go back to his place, and we'd have fish and chip Fridays pretty much twice a month all throughout my upbringing. So, again, it was all about eating what you catch. He never bought a loaf of bread in all the years that he lived on Pender. He baked his own bread and always had 4 or 5 loaves in the freezer. So just an incredible, resilient guy, and lived to be in his late 90s.
Wow. That's really interesting because he was teaching you that through his actions, not through words, it sounds like.
Yeah, and some of his words were pretty crass and cantankerous, and you put those aside as you get a little perspective when you get older. But his words, if he had them, were often words of wisdom that weren't often politically correct. But we always knew that he had they were well intended, and that he meant what he said. And that was one thing that I learned growing up with someone like that, that's a survivalist, is that you don't take things for granted, and you definitely say what you mean, even if it's not necessarily going to be the politically correct thing to say. If it's how you feel, you communicate it, and then people react to it in their own way. But he definitely he wouldn't win popularity contests as he got older in life, but we always respected him for that.
Nice. I just heard the phrase recently, honesty before harmony. And I think it's a good way to live as best as you can, because it's hard. It's a harder way to do. It's a harder road to go on to do it that way. Yeah,
he would definitely put us in line if we were misbehaving, or if he felt a certain way about a certain political figure. The words would come flying out of his mouth, and probably we'd have to leave the room. But on that other side of it, if someone came to his door and chatted with him and he was happy to talk to him, let's say it was I think at one point in time he had a visit from Mike Harcourt, who was the premier at the time, and Mike was doing some campaigning on Pender, and Mike came and knocked on Pappy's door, and I think they had a conversation. It might have been at his house or maybe at the golf course, I'm not sure. But after that, Pappy was just a hardcore supporter of Mike Harcourt because he took the time to come and talk to him face to face, and that was interesting. So he was always about the old school method of communicating directly with people, looking someone in the eye. He would just probably roll over in his grave listening to Facebook or watching Facebook, or probably even listening to this podcast. But I think that's also something that we don't see every day anymore. We've lost a little bit of that message of communicating directly with each other, speaking from the heart, maybe connecting more through friends and family without actually looking at a device. I think Pender's great because we still have a lot of people that are doing that, and we still have a community that is not necessarily all social media based, but it's still a big part of our island as well.
Wise words, Sammy Boyte. I feel like I'm getting wiser just sitting in the room with you right now. No, seriously, that's great for sure. Well, let's turn the focus back onto you and your life here. And you mentioned that you got a scholarship to Brentwood College when you were younger. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was lucky enough when I was in grade 7. I went to an interview in a couple of places. We went to have a look at St. Michael's School and Brentwood College and Shawnigan Lake School as well. And my parents always wanted to give me opportunities if I was willing to take them. And at that time, the opportunities for us on Pender were a bit limited. We could take a water taxi to Salt Spring. That school was a lot different than it is now. And so we didn't have as many choices in terms of how we would get connected into the secondary school from grade 8 to 12. So we took a chance. We went up to Mill Bay, and I remember my first impression of the school was it was based on the old British boarding school. So a lot of brick buildings and beautiful sports fields. And I was always an active kid. And I think for me, I met John Allpress, who became a really close friend and rugby coach. And we've kept in touch for all these years after that. But he took me out on the rugby pitch when I first got to the school, and I never had a rugby ball in my hands in my life, but he tossed me a rugby ball and he asked me to run down the field, and then he kicked one to me and see if I could catch it. And then he came over to me and said, "Hey son, you look like you're a pretty good athlete. If you want to come to this school, I think you'll do really well. And there's a lot of sports here that would interest you." He made me feel welcome right away as a youngster. I was only 13. And he just empowered me to take a chance. And, boarding school isn't for everyone, but for me, living on Pender, it was an opportunity to just immerse myself in some sports and arts. And it was a really active school. They pushed you to succeed at a high level in academics and sports. And I really ate it up. It fit my personality.
That must have been so weird to leave home. You say boarding school is not for everybody. That I think it's kind of hard to fathom about how that must have felt, because did you come back on weekends or?
So I found out after the fact, years after I graduated, that my mom and dad, they would visit me usually every Sunday. So my dad had a small boat, power boat, and they would boat over from Pender and visit us at the dock. The school was right on the water. So they would come and we'd either go for lunch or they'd come up for a visit, or they'd drive over the Malahat to visit me on the weekends. They'd come to my games if I was playing rugby. And obviously I've got amazingly supportive parents, and I wouldn't be who I am today if I didn't have my folks that definitely sacrificed a lot financially for me to do that, and emotionally too. The emotional part I found out more after the fact, like I was saying, because I learned that my mom would drop me off on Sundays and then she'd drive a little bit up on the side of the road and she'd start bawling because she missed us so much. But she didn't want to let us know that, she knew it was a good opportunity. And I think she did sacrifice, having that time for us when we were teenagers. She gave up some of that time so that we could have an opportunity to just see the world and, experience more than just Pender Island, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, way to go, Mom. Right on.
Yeah.
And so you talked about playing rugby at school, and that led to some opportunities as well, too. Can you tell us about your career playing rugby when you were in high school?
Well, I did excel at rugby, and, I found out that I have an active personality. I don't sit still very well, and I always like to keep busy. So the sports there were phenomenal. So we trained 3 days a week. We went to school on Saturday mornings, which is unusual, but we also got longer holidays. So on Saturdays, we would get up early. If it was a rugby term, we would train in the early morning before the sun was even up sometimes. Then we'd have games on Saturday afternoons and then practices throughout the week. So our team was a losing team for many years, from the grade 8 to the end of grade 10. We very rarely won a game. And then something clicked in our team as we gelled a little bit together, a group of guys that get to know each other, and you sometimes have to learn how to lose before you can learn how to win in sports. And we went from getting absolutely creamed on the pitch to grade 10, we started winning a few games. Grade 11, we started winning a few more. And then in grade 12, we actually went all the way to the Independent Schools Cup, and we won that. And then I think I'm not sure how we ranked in provincials, but I know that we were one of the top teams in the province, if not Canada, by the time I graduated. And I also got to tour Europe a couple times. So I traveled through Scotland, England, Ireland, Wales, Holland, Belgium, France on 2 separate rugby tours where we were one of the top high schools in Canada. So they allowed us to kind of represent the Canadian high school team. So we got to wear the red Canada jersey in our games, which is kind of cool.
Super cool. And was that your first experience going over to Europe?
Yeah. So the one thing I wish I had have done is maybe taken some time after school and traveled back, but I did get to go and at least see a little bit of the world there during my high school years in grade 10 and grade 12. But I was an enterprising kid, so I got right into the working world as soon as I finished high school, and then worked through university, and I never really stopped. So I wasn't one of those kids that took a gap year, but maybe for the best, because I think I also have one of those addictive personalities. So, maybe taking a year off wouldn't have been the right thing for me. Who knows?
Okay, well, what happened. And what exactly did happen after that? Because I know that you said that you went to Carleton University.
Yeah, I did. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I'm still not sure what I want to be when I grow up. But at the end of my high school year, I got a call into the office to see our counselor, or careers counselor, and I had no clue what I wanted to do. And he just said, "Well, you've been really good in your sciences. You're pretty good at your maths. Do you have any interest in engineering or architecture?" And I said, "Maybe, I don't know." And he told me about this industrial design program at Carleton. And Carleton didn't at that time have a great reputation. It was called Last Chance U, actually, or Carlton, where the K stands for quality. This was another term. So I think it was kind of made fun of by the other universities around, but at the end of the day, it was the program that I was interested in, and also the opportunity to see another part of Canada. So I did 4 years at Carleton and ended up with a degree in industrial design at the end of it.
Okay, and you said you were working your way through university. What was your university job there?
Yeah, so that's actually what we were talking about, people that have been maybe influential in our lives. And when I was about 17, I think, I got a job working here with Carl Hampson at Hampson Engineering on Pender. And he's one guy that you might want to interview if you haven't yet. I don't think so. He's just one of those island characters that has done so much for the community of Pender, but he also saw an opportunity to educate a young mind and put me to work at a young age. So I started sweeping his machine shop floor and worked in the summers while I was going to school. I would come back to Pender and he was always busy doing something. And if it was slow, he would send me out to his field and I would cut down thistles or firewood, or he would just keep me employed because I think he liked that I was reliable and worked hard, but he also knew that there was some potential there for me to maybe learn a little bit about his company and maybe stay for a long term. So in the end, I did. I finished my university degree and I came back and worked for him full time. And I did that for, I think it was about 10 years before I finally decided to switch careers and try the real estate thing.
Okay. Well, what sort of projects were you working on with Carl in those days?
Yeah, so he builds packaging machines, which is really interesting. So what he does is he takes any product off an assembly line, and a lot of the products that he dealt with or still deals with is hard to package things like glass bottles, or so he's in the liquor industry. Oh, he's done Demerara sugar. He's done all sorts of different things. His machine is a specialty thing, and it takes the product as it comes off the main assembly line, collates it into rows, puts dividers in, and then folds a box and glues the box. And then it comes out as a finished boxed case. So it's a case packer is what they call it. So I learned everything about his business in terms of, we would build these things in his sheep barn on Pender Island, which is really ironic. You drive on his 50 acres in the middle of nowhere, and we're building these fairly high tech engineering type devices that are one of a kind things. And then we would ship them all over the world. And I think Carl just recently retired this year. Actually, he finally hung up his engineering business and sold it to two of his employees, who are now operating, I think, in Sydney. So
10 years
yeah,
into that.
10 years, it kind of flew by pretty fast. I mean, I enjoyed it and it was really interesting work, but I also realized that it wasn't necessarily my passion. It was definitely interesting work, but Carl was the inventor. He's the mad scientist, and the business really was his business and his baby, which I thought was amazing and I respected a lot. But I also realized that I was the kind of person that really maybe needed to be a driver in my own right. And I wasn't sure if that business was the exact fit for me. So in 2006, I think it was, or maybe end of 2005, my mom had always said that she would like to start a business with me because we got along really well, and she'd been in real estate here for some time. So she asked if I would take my license and could we start a business together. So 2005, I started taking the real estate course, got my license in 2006, and then we opened our doors in, I think it was early 2006 at Hope Bay.
Okay. Well, there's so much to touch on about that, so let's just get right into it. So you opened the doors at Hope Bay. Why did you guys choose to start at Hope Bay?
Oh, instead of somewhere else on Pender. Yeah. Well, my mom had really fallen in love with that part of the island. I think she really liked it, that it was on the water, that it was a new entity. Hope Bay had burnt down in 1998 in a fire, and it had a series of sort of unfortunate tragedies where people tried to rebuild it and it didn't really happen. And then in 2002 or something like that, a group of 28 islanders decided that they were going to all commit some money and then finance a construction loan to rebuild the project. And it was really neat because it was a dedicated group of islanders. Some of them are still on the island, a lot of them are. And they just had a vision that they didn't want to lose Hope Bay as a iconic community space. And so they called themselves Hope Bay Rising, and they rekindled it from the ashes. And Brent Marsden was the lead contractor, and there's many names. If you want, you can just go to the website and have a look. But there was 28 local islanders, and they took about 2 years to rebuild it, and they opened in 2004. And they managed to secure a few solid commercial tenants like Parks Canada, and Peter Binner was a goldsmith there. And I think they had a restaurant, Hope Bay Cafe was the first restaurant there, and a few other tenants, core tenants. There was a hairdresser and a furnishing store, and they took a chance, and it worked. I mean, they managed to get this thing on the ground and running, and they won a commercial restoration award for their project as well, which is something that maybe not everyone knows. But they designed it after the old building and looked at the original plans for the site and tried to resurrect as close as they could the original footprint and the original feel of the space. So it was pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, I had Brent Marsden in episode 14, I think it is. So anybody listening who wants to find out more about the Hope Bay restoration, he goes deep into it, and it's pretty interesting stuff for sure. But can you talk about your initial first experiences with, I guess, having the office at Hope Bay and being a real estate agent?
It was really neat. We had a lot of support right off the bat because my mom is an angel on Pender and has done a lot of volunteer work, and she's a really special lady. She always works hard. She always tries to do the right thing. She had an amazingly solid reputation. It was a real challenge for her to break away from Pender Island Realty and start her own company, but she'd always wanted to do it, and she felt that if we did it together as a family business, that we'd get supported and that we'd have enough work to keep us all busy. And 2006 was a busy year. We got into it. That time was strong. And it was just my wife and Rita, myself, and my mom. And we started in the tiny little office just at Hope Bay. And from 2006 to 2009, the market was active. The island was quite busy. The economy was fairly strong. And we were productive. You know, we worked hard and we managed to build the business up. We took on a couple more agents and we expanded a little bit. And then 2009, things started to slow down a little bit. And we always just kept trying to provide a good service, to grow responsibly and socially responsibly, and to give a lot back to the community that was supporting us. And so we managed to weather some really tough years from 2009 to 2012. We continued to slowly grow during that time, but we also lost a lot of money as a company to keep our doors open. So we had a huge amount of inventory. We had a lot of listings, but not a lot of sales. And in real estate, if you have no sales, you have no income because your income is all back end loaded. When you sell a house, the company, gets paid and the realtors get paid. So when you have a lot of listings and nobody's buying anything, your overhead is massive and your income is small. So in 2012, 2013, we slowly wondered if we were going to have a business to work at and whether we should close our doors or restructure. But slowly the tap turned on in 2013 and the economy started to change a little bit. People started coming back to the island, buying houses or renovating homes. And it seemed to me that there was a lot of people moving to the island full time. That transition started then, and from just being a lot of seasonal occupants. And so that really changed the feel of the market again. So in 2006 to now, we've really seen quite a large down cycle, 2 small up cycles. And I think we're kind of in the middle right now where things are starting to taper off a little bit.
It's interesting about being a real estate agent and that personal connection that you share with people. I would imagine every time that you sign a contract and you're being asked to help them purchase a home or help them sell their home, how does that feel on your side of things to be in that position? Can you just comment on that a little bit?
Oh, I think that if you're a people person, then it's a perfect job for you. In order for people to be comfortable inviting you into their lives to help them, I think you have to have an innate love of human beings. And, for me, that's what really drew me to the job. And I think it's what's kept me here all these years is that you have to respect that it's very emotionally stressful for people. They're putting often a lot of weight on their decision making. And so if you can help be a voice of reason or a level playing field in their thought process and educate them and make them feel comfortable with whatever decision they're making, And you have to be able to ride out their highs and lows with a constant resonance. And I think that's really important. So yeah, I'm a people person. I mean, that's definitely, I enjoy helping people. And I think that's the service of that industry is a big part of what has probably made our company successful and maybe me personally. Just, I always see it as, what can I do to help? How can I help this person, this couple, or how can I help them get through this situation that's difficult or challenging? And what outcome can we have together that's going to be beneficial for them? And I've always put their needs ahead of my own. And I think that's, if you talk to people that are successful in business, I think that is the key to business, but it's also the key to a lot of other things in my mind.
Yeah, never a bad starting point to have with a question to ask yourself, how can I help?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned your wife, Rita, as well too earlier. How did you meet your wife, Rita?
Oh, good one. Well, Rita and I met in Victoria at a Halloween party back in, I have to get the dates right. She's going to kill me, but it was, I think, 2003, October. And I was dressed as a big inflatable clown, and I had just come off a long relationship, but I wasn't really looking for something long-term. I was just kind of figuring out what was happening in my life, who I was. And a mutual friend kind of invited me to a house party, and I saw her there, and she was dressed as a pirate. And yeah, we connected right away, just eye to eye. And it was really interesting because she had no idea what I looked like. I looked like I was a big 300-pound inflatable clown. And so I think she just liked my smile, and I liked the way she was looking. She was looking fine, and we connected right away. And we went on, I think, one other sort of visit engagement just at a party before that. And then I invited her to Pender on my first date.
Okay. So why did you invite her to Pender on the first date?
Well, I was living in Victoria at the time, but I always knew that if I found someone that was really special and that they liked Pender Island, that I would migrate back there. And so, yeah, I took Rita to our Christmas party at Hampson Engineering, which is, for her at the time, probably was a little unusual, because we had just met. But I always thought, well, if you're going to get to know someone, you may as well get to know them right away and not waste time. So we hit it off really well. She came over and we had a great time at Carl's party. He had a catered party at his house with kind of an intimate party with his our coworkers, and he always used to do a little family gathering kind of thing with a caterer. So she went to that with us. We kind of mingled with my colleagues on Pender, my coworkers, and then back off to Victoria we went. But it was the start of things to come, which was pretty cool.
Right on. So she liked the island right away?
She did. Yeah. I think looking back, she really appreciated the fact that I had some roots here, and that it was something that she came from a family of parents, been married forever. And I think stability in a marriage was really important to her, as it was to me. So she saw that that's what I was looking for, and we connected on that level really quickly. And so it was a natural fit for sure.
Nice. I was just thinking that you mentioned your mom a few times earlier here, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to speak about your dad. For people who may not know your dad, can you tell us a little bit about him?
Well, my dad's probably one of the most well-known guys on Pender because he's the local fire chief and has been doing that for, I think, over 30 years now. And so he started as the volunteer chief on Pender just shortly after we moved to the island, I think probably in the early 90s. And that's where he lives. His whole life is about serving the community in that way. He absolutely loves it. It's his passion. If you want to see Charlie Boyte, just go up to the fire hall and the coffee will be on and he'll be working there. And it's amazing to watch, your parents. As we get older, I'm surprised that my parents are still going strong, but they both found passions in their life that have kept them working, and haven't really felt the need to take their foot off the gas. I think they might be getting close though, but my dad is still dedicated to that job, and certainly growing up, watching him do his thing and just put in those kind of hours way and above beyond what he's getting paid for. It really empowered me to find a passion of my own. I think the happiest people that I've met in all my dealings in real estate and in life are the people that are giving of themselves to some cause, and it doesn't have to be a big cause, but any cause that's a little bit bigger than yourself. And you find these people may not be millionaires, they may not even be 100,000aires, but they're very, very fulfilled in their life and what they are experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So I'm learning as we go, and to me, that's empowering. When you see people that are successful in what they do it because they love it and they really want to give freely of themselves and not really necessarily expecting the reward or the carrot at the end. It's just about the process of what they're doing.
It is a really important thing in life to just be engaged in the process and not worried about what potential reward you're going to get, just to apply it to working for an hourly wage. I'm recently, just in the last couple of years, starting to sort of come to the realization of what you've been speaking about. And I think it's super important for my own personal growth to realize, wow, like the more you put into things, the more you're going to receive back, and not on a monetary level, but just on something far deeper. And I think that's amazing that you have been able to learn those lessons from your parents. That's awesome.
Yeah, my parents are definitely a huge influence in my life, and I'm a lucky guy. There's no question. I think about that a lot as I have kids now of my own. And I mean, I feel often that a lot of times I feel like I'm maybe failing as a parent, but I think every parent feels that. But when you look at the iconic level that I've elevated my parents to, in terms of how they've raised me and how many opportunities they've given me, it's kind of almost hard to live up to. But, I also appreciate that every day is different and we're in a different place than they were when I was growing up, or, things change quickly. And I think all you can do is love your kids really and try and make the best opportunities that you can for them. And also try and just be a good person every day. Be kind.
Good one. Well, let's lead into the second traditional question that we always get to on this podcast. And that question is, who has helped you along the way on Pender Island? And I know that you mentioned Carl Hampson earlier as one of the people, but anybody else that you want to highlight, give attention to?
Give some props?
Yeah, props.
When you grow up as a kid on an island like this and you think back to your life, I mean, if I was to pick any one person, I think I'd probably be missing 100. It feels like as you go through life and reflect back on an island like this, that I can't think of one person that didn't help me, or teach me something. I mean, just goes right back to my school experience here with lovely teachers. Mrs. Jean Bradley, she was one of my elementary school teachers. She's still got family here on Pender, the Bradley family. So we're still all connected. It's in these very strange ways, but it all goes back to Mrs. Bradley's teaching experience, I think in grade 3 it was. And so, I mean, you think about the influential teachers that you have when you're a kid, and you think about the people that impact you in your work and in our sports. We're lucky to play hockey on Pender with a group of guys, and there's a whole bunch of them I've known forever. Guys like Steve Wright and Gary Goodman. You probably interviewed, I think, Gary. I know I've listened to part of that one. And those guys are just uplifting people in the community that have been sort of really influential at times when I needed them, or even sometimes they don't even know that they're influencing me, because I'm watching them and how they live their life and realizing that I could maybe think about things a little differently or look at something from a different angle. So I think I'm an observer of people as well. It's probably what drew me again to the profession that I'm in. I really enjoy hearing people's stories. I enjoy watching how people tackle problems and challenges in their own different way. And I think you can never stop growing and learning.
And so you're saying that this island has like an abundance of people to draw inspiration from?
I would say in a nutshell, it's really hard I can't specifically think of any one instance where I was profoundly impacted, but I would imagine that if you look at my experience over many years here, it's been thousands of people that have impacted me in a very positive way, from a community that's really about the whole, it takes a village to raise a child. I mean, that's the philosophy, I think, of Pender Island. And it's been the same since I was a kid. I don't think that's changed. There's been lots of changes, lots of growth. Our population has doubled since I grew up here. there's more people on the island. We have more cars and traffic a little bit, but the fundamental values of what brought us to Pender as a family, I don't think they've changed in all these years. And that's really cool.
It never gets tiring to hear people talk about how much help they've received on the island. It really shocked me the first 5 or 6 times I heard it, where one person after another was like, so many people have helped me along the way. But it doesn't get tiring to hear it. And it's such a wonderful thing to be spoken out loud repeatedly, that this island is just so helpful and really rallies around people in desperate need, or is there in subtle ways like you're describing. And it's super cool.
Yeah, I agree. We have a really special community, and you see it when there's families in need or people in need individually. We rally and try and help each other. And I think if you fall on Pender Island, there's 1,000 people to pick you up, and it just is a really empowering thing to be a part of. And I think you don't get that as much in a bigger community. At least I didn't find it when I was living in Victoria. I did get to know my neighbors in a little cul-de-sac on Taylor Street, but I lived there for 5 years, and I would have to say I can't really count the number of influential experiences, maybe on one hand, where a neighbor helped me or where I helped someone. People are a little bit more individualistic in their compartmentalized lives on in a bigger city. And I think it's just the nature of things are busier, lives are full, the borders are drawn up maybe a little differently, and people just don't necessarily reach outside of themselves to connect to their little villages. Whereas here we don't necessarily have as much of a choice. You're going to see the same people in the grocery store every day and at the gas station or at the coffee shop. And so I think you have to be the type of person that is okay with that. And it's not for everyone, for sure. I mean, I've had people that I've, in the course of showing property, after an hour, they say, when's the next ferry? It's just, it doesn't fit them. If you're used to the environment of a city, the hustle and bustle, lots of things happening, or even just not being in an isolated environment, being surrounded by others, then Pender can be really tough. So I see both sides. But for me, because I grew up in this environment, I think I wouldn't have it any other way.
Nice. Something else I just wanted to ask about as well too was that you mentioned in the email about the Hope Bay Rising Group approaching you and your family as well too about purchasing Hope Bay.
Yeah, we were really, a lot of fortunate things happened in our business. I think probably because my mom was a big driver in building the company and also her reputation. So we were a pretty young company in 2008. We just started our company. We were 2 years old. And the group of folks that resurrected Hope Bay were managing it, but it was a little difficult because they had 28 owners and a collective group of owners that were overseeing the management. But decision-making was becoming a little more tricky when you have a board of directors to make decisions. And I think they realized that their goal, they called their company Hope Bay Rising. And once Hope Bay had risen, they realized that the best thing to do was to maybe find the next person or entity to pass the torch on to. So it was Brent, I think, that came up to us one afternoon and said, we've been thinking, we decided as a group that it might be time for us to sell, but it's really important to us who we sell it to. And it is, and still is, a tough thing to run a commercial space on the Gulf Islands. It's a lot of extra energy and effort just to keep things rolling on Pender when we have a small economy. But he really convinced us that we were the right fit for what they were hoping to achieve, which was to create a space on Pender that could be a legacy property for the islanders to enjoy, for the community of Pender, maybe for arts, culture, for a collective gathering place for people on Pender that's going to be bigger than any one person, and also maybe keep the historic character of the island intact. And so he sold us. I mean, he was good. Brent's a salesman. You probably had found that on your podcast. He's really good at the gift of the gab, but he definitely empowered us to look at it. We didn't have any clue if we could even do it financially. It was a massive undertaking for us to even consider, because both of my parents were still working and, mortgage on our house. And I had just moved from Victoria. We sold our Victoria house and we were just getting into a small renovation on our house. So somehow the bank decided it was a good idea. Our company had had a couple of years of strong sales. And so we managed to convince the bank that it was a good idea. We somehow came up with a down payment by refinancing, and we were able to become the caretakers of Hope Bay. And I think it was a really nice move for us. I mean, it definitely connected us to Pender in another way in terms of being involved actively with the pretty important and significant piece of real estate, as you call it. But I think more importantly, it allowed us to continue to be able to operate our business, but also think about what it's going to be like for my kids. How are they going to see Pender when they grow up? Are there going to be places that are safe and interesting for them to play that maybe haven't gone mainstream, that are a little bit nostalgic, that remind people of a time that, once was? And I think Hope Bay has that potential. So as a family, I mean, our goal has always been to just keep it thriving, and we've gone through some struggles, some really tough economic times where we lost some core tenants and tenants retired. And I feel like we're kind of building up a tidal wave on the other end now. We've got some fantastic new tenants. We're really excited to see that their sense of community it's a fit and match for what we feel is what Hope Bay should be. And so, we've got Pender Chocolates now who have joined us. We've got Gather Collectibles, that's Matt and Cher. They're doing live music in the summers. They're working at getting the restaurant back on track. So I think my goal and my hope and my vision would be that Hope Bay is going to be sort of entrenched in the island community as a space that is bigger than any one of us. And hopefully we can hold on to it long enough and keep the real estate thriving so that financially we can do it. It really hasn't been easy, but we still believe in the space.
Nice. And you use the word caretakers as a way to describe your role in Hope Bay there. And I think that's such a wonderful way to describe it. And as well, too, you thinking about the future, about how your children are going to interact with the venue as adults. And it seems as if you have a very long-term vision for Hope Bay.
Yeah, my parents are at the different end of the spectrum, so their vision might be a little shorter minded than mine now as they get closer to retirement. But as a family, I think we're united in the fact that we really want to see the space thrive as a community space. And, moving forward, how we do that, I'm not sure, but we're looking at maybe bringing in another local investor at some point to keep that torch going. We've had opportunities to sell the space and the building, but they haven't been the right fit. We feel it should be a space that's for the community. And I mean, it's kind of the last piece of Pender left that I grew up with. Port Washington store, unfortunately, that store had to be demolished and for various reasons. And I think that was another little keystone. I mean, all of the marinas and resorts have been kind of bought by larger companies or bigger companies that have tons of money behind them. So we're going to see some big changes likely happening on Pender in the marina avenues on the island. And our goal is to not make Hope Bay change. We don't want it to fall down, and we want to keep it up and maintain it, but we want to preserve the character of what the original 28 had in mind, which is the charm and the nostalgia of that space. And we're hoping we can do it. Just trying to stay positive every day. And I volunteer a lot of my extra time just to make sure that things are happening and that the water doesn't flood in the basement, and that we make our own salt water, so it's a desalinization system. We have Peter Binner, the goldsmith, who helps me with the water, and he's kind of the backbone of Hope Bay. If he retires, I don't know what we'll do, but we have all these people that have given of their time over the years to, there's not a huge amount of profit to be made in a commercial space like Hope Bay. It's really more about a social investment. And we've always seen that if you can hold on to an investment like that for a long enough time, it might be a benefit to your family or your kids, but it certainly will be a benefit for the moment, as you're moving through life. That's something that our kids can enjoy, something that we can enjoy together as islanders. And I know my parents would like to see some financial return at the end of the day, but my feeling is that the financial reward is is just in the ability to be able to use the space and work there. It's been a massive impact on my life. I spend hours working at Hope Bay, and I'm fortunate to wake up. I hear the seals if I'm working late, or if I'm going early in the morning. There's always something happening on the water, boats coming and going, and the moon rising at night. It's just one of the most spectacular places that I've ever seen in my life.
I really appreciate you sharing this with me, Sammy, because I know you, I've known you for a lot of years, and we hang out and play disc golf together, but I've never heard you speak about Hope Bay in this way, and it's really a privilege to get to hear you explain your position on Hope Bay and how you feel about the legacy of it and what you want to do moving forward. And just want to say thank you. I think it's really great. Really love what you're saying. Thank you.
Thanks, bud.
Yeah, no problem, man. Segue. Okay. And you brought me over a couple bottles of homemade cider when you came over here. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I think this is pretty cool what you're doing. So it's a small little gift that I brought for you, and a little piece of myself, because we shared this cider. It's a new thing for me. Hopefully it tastes okay. But we got a group of people together on Pender last year, and we recently sold our property in Magic Lake, and we were fortunate enough to buy a little bit larger acreage. And on the acreage, the fellow that we bought it from had developed a pretty sizable orchard. There's about 30 trees. So there's some fruit trees, some nut trees, apples, many different varieties. And we know nothing about farming, but we're learning, and we're making mistakes. We tried making some cider last year. In order for us to learn, we shared it with, or collectively got together with, Ginger and Chris and Renee on Pender. And Ginger is an expert. She's been brewing cider her whole life. She's a scientist, and we were really lucky. She's got all the equipment. So we just supplied our apples and said, we know nothing about cider, help us. And in exchange, maybe we can learn and get a little bit of cider back. So that was our first year's experience. And you get to try the first crop from our cider.
Okay, right on. So Ginger who?
Oh, Ginger Talbot. I'm not sure. She's been around on Pender forever. She's quietly doing her thing as one of the most incredible people on Pender that you're going to meet. She does bookkeeping for our company as well. So she's kind of the backbone of the accounting end of our business. And if we didn't have her, I don't know what we'd do. She's another one of those Pender treasures that just keeps us on track. Just lovely to be around. And the most important part is that she's amazing at making cider. So we get to learn from her, which is great.
She's got decades of experience with making cider.
Yeah, cider. And then, of course, she does property management and maintenance around the island. And she's got a few core clients that she works with. And she's always busy. She's also got a property that she's developing with an orchard as well. And just hardworking lady, and as good as they come. So we're really lucky that we get to learn from her and get to share in the experience of making cider with a group of islanders as well. It's really fun. I'd never done anything like that. I know you've done some home brewing, which is pretty cool. This was my first experience. And to me, the product isn't even as important as the process. Just the whole pressing of the apples, the experience of working together to get that done, harvesting the apples collectively. I think that there's so many things that are great that come with doing something like that comes from the property that you live on, or if you can even just do it and go and pick some apples off the trees on Pender, because many of them are just, the apples fall to the ground. So I highly recommend it. The deer eat them. Yeah, I highly recommend trying. I mean, even if you just make apple juice and do it by hand on a small press, it's really interesting and rewarding to do that. It's a great process, and it's lots of fun.
Nice, yeah. And somebody along the way planted those trees many, many years ago. Do you know how old those apple trees are on your property, roughly? Or
I think he planted the start of the orchard about 15 years ago. And so the newest trees are maybe 10 or so. So they're all mature producing trees. And, we're learning how to prune and what to do, what not to do, how to make sure that you're not getting mites or bugs. And we're trying to do it organically, so it's a little more hands-on. We're not spraying or anything, so we're just learning how to take care of the trees naturally, and it's a huge learning curve. I mean, I'm totally green at it, but I'm having fun. And so we're trying to work with our kids as well, teach them a little bit about living off the land, growing simple things in our garden like tomatoes and beans and stuff, and just trying to help them understand that, the food doesn't come from the supermarket. It comes from hard work. And I think on Pender, we're really lucky that we have so many food growers that are doing the same thing. Some of them are just backyard growers, but then we have these beautiful farms that are producing food for Pender. So we're lucky. We're really lucky that we have quality, amazingly good food right in our backyards.
For sure. A couple of years ago, a friend was renting a place with an orchard in the backyard and invited my wife and I over to go pick some apples with a bunch of other people. And it was such a fun afternoon because there was this abundance and we're all giggling and trying the different apples and seeing what they taste like. And there was a couple pear trees on the property as well too. But it was the experience of sharing and harvesting together. And it was such a memorable afternoon. It was such a beautiful invitation as well, too, for them to say, well, we're not going to use all these apples. So come on down and grab them. It was great.
Well, I think that's the cool thing about Pender, too, because if you really are looking to try something new, you're probably 1 degree of separation from finding someone that's willing to share with you in what they know, and it could be something simple as apples, but it comes down to anything that you want. We just have a wealth of depth of knowledge in this community. So I've always been impressed by that. And I mean, I didn't have a clue that I'd be making cider if you asked me 2 years ago. I didn't have a clue that, there was so many people on Pender that had this understanding of knowledge of how to grow things. And if you have questions, you can just ask around at your local coffee shop, and you're going to find there's probably people that have done it and will they're just happy to share their knowledge. It's something that I think it's a gift that not necessarily everyone gets. I think when we're talking about growing food, I know they're doing some amazing things with community gardens and the cooperative group that's looking at agriculture on the islands. So we're getting there. And I mean, like I said, I know nothing. I really am just learning. I'm like an infant when it comes to these things, but I've got an open mind, and I'm hoping that at some point, I'll be able to sustain our family from our property. We've got the space for it, and I'm working a lot right now in my business to support our family. But I think the long-term goal is for us to be able to live off the land a little bit more.
Fantastic. I like what you say about the free exchange of information shared on the island as well too, and that people's willingness to open up and try to answer any questions or problems that other people might have, whether it be in the coffee shop, the hardware store, the grocery store. It seems as if people are really at the ready to try to help in that way as well too.
Yeah, I think I get asked a lot, how's the real estate market? So I often joke with Rita that if we have to go and get milk, I'll send her, because if I go to the store, I'm probably going to ask 15 times, how's the market? What's going on? How's the real estate market? It's the blessing and the curse of the small community, right? But on the other side of that is that I think we have so many people on Pender that feel the same way I do, that they feel lucky to live here. And so sharing in their knowledge or sharing something that they've experienced and enriching someone else's life in a positive way, it just comes naturally for the people here. And that's, to me, I think the key that has made me stick around on Pender, and hopefully will be good for my kids and, everyone's families, because we just have this little gem of an island where it's a bit of a utopia, which is sometimes hard to comprehend, when there's so many other crazy things happening in the world. You can always go outside and open the door if you want to really, get real with the world and at large. But I mean, what an amazing place to be able to wake up every day, drive around Pender. We don't have traffic. We don't have traffic lights. We don't have ambient light. Even at night, you can see the stars. You look at all those things that, it's almost heaven on earth, really. I mean, I don't know how else you can describe this island. I mean, there really isn't any other place. And I've traveled a little bit, maybe not extensively, but I just haven't found a spot in the world that feels quite like this. And I know a lot of people, I think, on Pender that are here probably feel that same way, or they wouldn't have stuck around so long.
Well, I was going to say, if you have anything else to add at the very end here, but that was so eloquent as I was listening to you saying that. I'm like, how is he going to do better than that? How is he going to wrap it up with something better than that? But Sammy, it's been a real pleasure to get to sit down with you. Thanks for coming in. And I will say, if there's anything else that you want to add at the very end, here you go.
I just think it's great you're doing this. I think it's important for people to tell their stories. And I don't think anyone on Pender has attempted something of this magnitude to talk to a wide group of people. So I'm really empowered by you. So keep up the good work, buddy. I'm serious. This is really cool. And I mean, even if only 100 people from Pender hear it, you never know where those stories will be told after that, or, you know, what experiences that will give to someone, you know, listening at night. And I think the cool thing about this podcast is it doesn't necessarily have an end. You know, there's this whole looping thing that goes with the spoken word. It transcends time almost. So you're on the right track, and I'm really happy you're doing this for Pender. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Sammy. All right. Well, to honor that interview, I decided I would come down to Shingle Bay. So Shingle Bay is now the site of a national park reserve. There are a few camp spots, and the only way to get in here is either by kayak, canoe, or walking in, which is not a far walk. And the reason I decided to come in here was because there is a small orchard here as well, too. It's my understanding the orchard had been planted by the previous owner and remains intact after it was bought by Parks Canada. So there's a sign here that gives some information. It says from 1927 to 1959, this area was the site of a fish reduction plant, the remains of which could be seen today just out in the water. And this is a beautiful little gem on the island. Really like this spot a lot. I want to thank Sam so much for doing that interview. It was really wonderful to do. I want to thank you so much for listening. And I want to thank everybody who has done an interview with me this year. Huge thanks to all those people. It is an incredibly vulnerable thing to sit in front of a microphone for an hour and answer questions about your life and your past and who you are and your thoughts, and then have it put out to your peers in the community. Big thanks to every single person that said yes, because without them, there would be no podcast. So thank you so much to all of you for doing that. And I mentioned at the beginning of the show that I would tell you what my plans for next year are, as I plan on doing another 25 interviews next year. So ideally, I'd like to release 2 a month. Hopefully, I can stick to that, but my commitment is to put out 25 interviews next year. If anyone has any people that they would like to nominate for potential interviewees, I'm including my email address at the bottom of the write-up for this show. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, that would be fantastic. As well, too, if anybody wants to contribute or donate financially in support of this podcast, I'd be very open to that. Just to give you some background as to the process of doing this podcast, is I have done this completely on my own from the beginning. The major time goes into the editing process. Once I complete an interview, it takes me approximately 4 hours to do the first edit, where I take out any ums or ahs and I make it as tight as I possibly can. And then I go through and do a second edit to tighten it up even more. Then I, of course, record the intro, I record the outro, and I put that together. At this point, from start to finish, it takes about 10 hours if everything goes relatively smoothly. Sometimes it takes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but right now the average is about 10 hours. And prior to that, the first number of interviews I did, it was closer to 15 hours, where I would go through and do 3 different edits just to make sure that it sounded as good as I could possibly make it. And there was a lot of learning involved in the beginning, and I feel like I've smoothed that out a bit, but it's taken a long period of time. And not only have I put in hundreds of my own hours into this project, but I put in hundreds of dollars into this project as well, too, to have the website hosted and have a place where people can go to download it so they can listen to it anywhere, not to mention investment of equipment into this as well, too. So if you want to contribute and you feel so inclined to helping this project along, anything would be greatly appreciated. I didn't really want to go through a conventional means of financial donation via Patreon or a donate button. I just kind of wanted to make it a little bit open. So if anybody wants to contribute in any way, you can email me, where my address will be located at the bottom of the page as well too. If anybody has any experience with any grant writing, that would be incredible, but I guarantee that I will complete 50 interviews. And then once I've reached that, we'll see what happens. But if you enjoy this and you like what you hear, even if there's a way that you think you can help that is unique to you, because this is a little bit of a unique podcast, I'd like to think, feel free to contact me and let me know. But that's it for this year. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate people taking the time to listen to an hour-long interview, and we'll see you in 2019, and until next time.